everybody to our February edition of the Ubuntu Desktop Game and Data. That happens to be at the beginning of March. I'm your host, Heather, and I'm joined by our main guest is Eggy. You might know him as Glorious Egg Roll on Twitter, Mastodon, all the things. We have Ollie as our product manager on the Ubuntu side, and Ken is the desktop manager. Yeah, so we are here to talk with you all about Linux gaming and a few other cool things. So yeah. I wanted to start the question off by, or start the stream off by asking everybody what game everybody's been playing lately. And I'll start with The Witcher on my Steam Deck. I can't get enough of it, really. Eggy, what have you been playing?
I'm gonna be honest. I have a kind of a addiction to League of Legends. I know people are gonna be like, "What about Dota?" I like Dota too, as well. I do. Just for me, League of Legends has a bigger. I think it has a bigger roster, and it has some really fun character toolkits. And it's just been a game I played for a long time. So my after work go to is play 2 or 3 games and 2 or 3 matches or so, and then after that I'll probably switch it up. It's usually something random after that. I've got tons of games on my Steam library, but I can't play too much League of Legends because there are some great matches that you have, and then there are some terrible matches that you have, and I play my 2 or 3 matches and then I'm done. I'm like, okay, that's my limit.
That's understandable. Ken, what about you?
Can I say Subiquity? I know that's lame, but I feel like lately I've been doing so much install testing with 2304. Now, over the holiday, I spent a lot of time playing Raft with my sons. I enjoy that game tremendously.
Do you feel like you're winning at Subiquity?
Yes, I do think so. I've got some beautiful automated installs going now, beginning to end, which is great. So.
Oh, that's nice. What about you, Ollie?
Continuing Eggy's theme, I've been playing the other Riot Games property, Valorant. I got super into that recently. They had this the VCT lock-in in Sao Paulo last night. So it's like a big world championship game between Valorant pro teams, and it was actually amazing. It was like one of the most redonkulous finals of any esports I've ever seen. Like this incredible comeback from Fnatic. So I then immediately hopped into a few games this morning and embarrassed myself being unable to.
I know how that feels too. You see a good match going on or a good tournament going on, and you're like, oh, I want to play now. Then you get in there and you just get stomped. And you're like, oh,
exactly. Yeah. And then last week I had a week off, and I got super into this game called, part of my language, GTFO, which is like a stealth, tactical, co-op horror game by some of the guys who made Payday. And that is something else made in Unity, and the lighting and atmosphere in that is bananas.
I've seen that. It looks really good. I just haven't personally jumped into it.
Yeah, have to be in the zone for that. Yeah, it takes like an hour and a half to do like one mission, and everyone has to be super on point. You sort of end the sesh just been like so yeah, but really enjoying that. Managed to persuade my brother to buy it yesterday as well, so I've been taking him through those early stages.
And it's 30% off on Steam right now. I might just have to.
It is, yeah. And gold rated on ProtonDB.
Oh, nice.
That's great. I have to say, like, I am pretty behind the curve when it comes to gaming on Linux because, well, I found board games and Linux, and games didn't work so well. I mean, I did play games on Wine, like Hearthstone. I played that a lot until there was an update. This was like, I don't know, 12 years ago or something. And then everything broke, and I just kind of flipped the table and said, I'm just going to go play Magic.
It's changed a lot, especially within the last, I want to say, at least 3 years. When I first got into it, my whole, I've done articles and stuff like this there's stuff about my origin, but the moral of the story was I was a diehard Warframe player, and I don't play so much anymore. But yeah, I'll still log in every once in a while. But I originally wanted to get Warframe working on Linux, and then this was before DXVK, before Proton or any of that stuff. And when I first found out about both F Audio and DXVK, I was like, oh god, I gotta find who the dev is for this, who these guys are. And then I was like, oh, I can contact them. Let me go ahead and file a bug report on this and that, and say Warframe's not working, Warframe broke, this and that. And they're like, okay, we get it. But it got fixed. And eventually that's kind of where it went. First I started doing bug reports on Warframe, and then another game would come up and I'd try and get a bug filed for that, or another one, and so on and so forth. And then eventually Proton came out, and I was just like, oh, here we go. But it's just a roller coaster.
That's awesome.
So Eggy, what do you think triggered that last 3 years of like massive improvement? So lots of people are always talking about the Steam Deck, and the Steam Deck is sort of both driving like a wave of Linux gaming adoption, but it's also riding one, isn't it? Right. So what do you think are sort of those big catalysts?
I'm not sure what triggered it. I know Valve, they contracted the DXVK dev very, very early on, but I'm not sure if he started that project on his own and then got picked up, or if he was already contracted by Valve when he started and then kind of just put it out there and then was eventually like, okay, yeah, by the way, I'm contracted by Valve. I don't know which one came first, like the chicken or the egg. But yeah, once DXVK was established, that's kind of what got everything else rolling.
That's cool. So you said you got started like with Warframe. Did you expect for your work to kind of take off like once Proton came out? And
no, everything kind of blew up like crazy. It was both of those. It was Warframe and League of Legends. So the first thing is I told you about the Warframe stuff, and then the other thing is League of Legends. I had Flatpak was early in its development at that point, and I had Flatpacked League of Legends to get it working, and then of course it broke again, and then I worked on fixing it, and then it broke again, and I quit for a little while because they kept breaking it, and we've got it back to a point now where it's working, but I had also apparently Flatpacked it incorrectly, and at that point in time, I was very early in trying to get that stuff working, and when I had tried to upstream it, there's like, yeah, you need to go change all this stuff, and then at that point I was just like, okay, yeah, I just want to play my game.
Well, I think the gaming community like thanks you for your persistence in that space, because it has as you said, like it's kind of blown up, right?
The Linux gaming community has been amazing. They will, they're very good at pinpointing lots of things that are wrong, obviously, but it's a good thing. I will say it's a good and bad thing. It's a good thing to get those things fixed, but it's a bad thing if you're like me and your mind just never shuts off, because then you're like, gotta fix this, gotta fix this, gotta fix this, gotta fix this.
Yeah. So how would you say like the current state of play is on Linux? Like,
I think it's awesome.
Yeah.
I think it's fantastic. We've got, as long as at this point, it's just pretty much as long as the publishers are willing to play ball with the anti-cheat situation, we can pretty much get any game running on it. Like, unfortunately, Valorant, does not run on Linux because of their anti-cheat, rootkit, fun stuff. But League of Legends does, and I think that's also because they are using the older anti-cheat system for League of Legends. I hope they don't use the Valorant anti-cheat in League of Legends. That would really suck. But at the same time, I understand the need to, or the want to stop cheaters. On the other side, you have other companies. I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to say I used to play a lot of Destiny 2, and I stopped playing Destiny 2 completely. And that's because Bungie decided they wanted to start immediately banning people who even tried to use or play the game on Linux. And you're trying to play on a platform that isn't supported. I get that, but it was you try one time, permanent ban. No ifs, ands, or buts, no discussion, and like end of everything. And that sucks. Like, as opposed to something like maybe Easy Anti-Cheat, where if you tried to load it up in wine or something early on, it would ban you, or it would either like just kick you from the match or kick you from the game, or like do a ban for 24 hours, something like that. Those are a little bit more tolerable and understandable. It's like, okay, we get the point. Don't run in wine, move on to something else. So the anti-cheat situation there has been a mixed bag, but as far as the publishers go, we do have tons of publishers who have enabled the compatibility for both Easy Anti-Cheat and BattlEye, which has been great. The games and publishers that have been doing that have been awesome, and having those on Steam Deck has been amazing.
Yeah. I mean, since you mentioned anti-cheat, what kind of challenges do you think are remaining still for like anti-cheat in Linux gaming?
There's a few. The biggest challenge is getting the publishers to agree. Obviously. Once they agree and basically, what they call flip the switch, there's a little bit more involved than just basically flipping a switch. But the biggest thing is just getting those publishers to say yes and being like, okay, let's go ahead and get this rolling so that we can get your game on the Steam Deck and therefore get other get compatibility on other Linux OS distros because it runs on the Steam Deck. Obviously, their kicker is they get their game running on a handheld, but the kickback for us is that we get it running on pretty much any Linux OS that we want. That's pretty much it.
Okay.
Just convincing them.
Fair enough. Yeah, I guess to have a large enough market share to really.
There's sort of like a cultural element as well, isn't there? Right, where there's the chicken and egg situation of you want to prove that there's an audience on Linux that makes it worth investing in, right? And then if you don't enable your game on Linux, then you're never going to find out. So there's how do we tweak the dynamics of that feedback loop? And I think also, Linux users in general tend to be a little bit more possessive of what is running on their machine and what's actually going on there. And I think inherently a lot of when we talk about things like the Valorant anti-cheat, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a Linux user who even if it worked on Linux, would be super happy about it. I mean, I'm not super happy about having that running on my Windows partition. So I think that there's also an element of the privacy and security side where our gamers particularly tend to be very conscious of that kind of thing.
There's been some talk, around on the future of potential in-kernel anti-cheat. Eggy, I'd be interested to hear what are your thoughts on that. Do you think is that something we're going to see more demand for in the future?
I couldn't tell you, to be honest. Kernel level anti-cheat is not something I mess too much with. Like I said, beyond my big. I spent several years trying to get Destiny 2 to run, and that was the closest that I got as far as like really digging in and trying to communicate with the other people involved. There are some super, super talented people working for Valve. I've got, when I talk to quite a few people on a daily basis on Discord regarding that are involved with that team. And especially the few people that are involved with the anti-cheat portions. But as far as I'm aware, I personally haven't heard anything about kernel-level anti-cheat or getting it to work or anything on that line or along those lines.
Okay. Well, while we've been having this great anti-cheat discussion, there's been some good questions in the chat. So I'm going to start with one from Mohammed. What is happening on Ubuntu regarding gaming? Ken, as one of our fearless leaders, do you want to take this?
Sure. Well, I mean, we've spent a lot of time, this past year as we've staffed up, some folks just to work dedicated on the gaming experience. We started off with obviously the Steam Snap. And one of the primary motivations there was to just be able to give people a reliable way to get their gaming environment set up, right, without having to add a PPA for Mesa and things like that. Just getting this reliable gaming environment up and running. And I think we've accomplished much of that already, which is great. I'm looking forward to actually getting that out on stable. It's currently in beta channel only. We haven't published it to stable yet. Probably the coolest thing there is the ability to kind of switch your risk aversion for what versions of Mesa do you want. So you can, by default, you get the Kissack fresh builds of Mesa in the Steam Snap. But as a user, you can very easily switch to something much more aggressive like Oibov if you want. And with Oibov, actually, on my mediocre ThinkPad laptop, I can play CSGO, which I've never been able to play on this laptop before. It's an old game. You would think it would work.
That's interesting.
But with the Steam Dev, it wouldn't work on this particular machine. But with the Oibov PPA enabled, with the latest Mesa, just as of like a month ago, CSGO plays. Don't know why. But it's nice to be able to, get that newer version of Mesa without destabilizing like GNOME Shell, for example. Anything else on your system.
I know how that goes.
Worst case scenario, you destabilize your gaming environment, and then you can revert that if you need to, but you're not going to lose your login session, right? So, we spent a fair bit of time, working on that experience, and we're still working to improve that. Certainly looking for feedback and more testers, but we've had, a great response so far. There's a lot of users out there using the Steam Snap, which is really great to see. We're working on some other things to make it easier for users to tweak their environment. Game mode support via the Snap. Mango HUD is something that's coming that you can use it inside the Snap. We're doing some work, particularly on the game publishing side, to make it easier for game publishers to hopefully publish their games for Linux. Make it simple to, output a game from like Godot and publish it straight to the Snap Store. If you don't want to go the Steam route, be able to publish it directly as a Snap would be really cool. Same for, Unity, etc. So we've done some work there as well.
I would like to note, if you're getting Mango HUD working, you should include Goverlay. Goverlay is, the front-end GUI app for Mango HUD. So I think they basically go hand in hand, because if you're running Mango HUD, you have to have some way to configure it, and you can mess with the configurations by hand with a text editor, but Goverlay just makes it a million times easier. Just click a few check boxes and be done with it.
Great.
Yeah, I think like in general, we're talking a lot about the Snap, but it's sort of an interesting situation for Ubuntu, right? Because we have such a broad user base of people who are leveraging Ubuntu for all sorts of things, from like proper, regulated enterprise environments to hobbyists to data scientists. You've got a lot of developers there who are really relying on the sort of stable LTS releases of Ubuntu, and you can see when you look at things like the Steam hardware survey, the number of gamers who sort of switch and leverage our interim releases is actually quite high. It's much higher than the sort of standard number of people percentage of people who would get engaged with an interim release versus an LTS, because when you've got those developers, they want that stable environment, and so there is definitely an appetite for the latest drivers, more cutting edge technology, and we can't really offer the same sort of thing as something like Navarro, where it is the bleeding edge. And so our challenge is, how do we bring the bleeding edge to Ubuntu gamers in a way that is accessible to people who are maybe not as comfortable, dealing with PPAs, who are maybe not as aware of the security risks of something like a PPA. I think if you really understand your system and how PPAs work, then that's excellent. But if you are someone who just wants to get into gaming, who doesn't want to tinker with things like that, using things like the Snap to make sure that there are ways of delivering the elements of sort of bleeding edge tech that we can deliver via that mechanism in a way that is not destabilizing the rest of your system, so that you can switch back to work mode, right, is really important. So it's a really challenging balance for Ubuntu, specifically in some ways, right? Because we have to make sure that your OS is ready for work in a office environment as much as it is ready to game. And I think being able to switch channels, have Mesa drivers in a Snap, be able to switch channels between sort of different risk levels, revert those back, or not use them is quite an important way of striking that balance. And I think, one of the things we're really excited about and we're exploring is someone mentioned, I think in the comments, how do we do something similar with things like NVIDIA drivers, right? And that's something that we're spending a lot of time investing in. You could imagine the concept of take the Mesa drivers, you think about NVIDIA drivers as a Snap in some way, and being able to change channels between that rather than reinstalling and uninstalling drivers depending on what you're trying to do with things. So that's sort of why we're really invested in the Steam Snap initially, because it seems like the biggest bang for buck, right? That is where most of the gamers are. How do we make sure that within that environment and ecosystem, we can give them all of the cool stuff that they're reading about on Phoronix, on Eggy's blog, right? That sort of stuff within the constraints of something like Ubuntu.
Yeah,
Speaking
Sorry,
of
go ahead.
Linux, I wanted to just ask, Adam asked about HDR for game support, since I saw there was a recent Phoronix post about
Adam, hey. Yeah, so I mean, there's some work getting started now within GNOME for HDR support. We're going to be sending some folks to Brno for an HDR Hackfest next month. We're getting that work started now. I mean, the real issue is how do you get an app or a game that needs HDR in a window where your desktop where the window management support basically is the complication there. So we're getting started on that work now. I can't say when it will be done, but we are investing in that, as well as our others. And we're not the only ones involved there, but we're definitely going to be investing there.
I'm excited about HDR. Right now, the only way that you can do it is through the GameScope session, and I've already as soon as that came out, I was like, oh, we got to get this going. So I went and set up the whole package for GameScope session on Nobara and got all that set up. And I was testing it. It's really cool. It's really, really freaking cool to actually be able to finally use HDR. But the problem with GameScope is that right now it's limited to specific resolutions. So, for example, I've got a 32:9 ultra-wide Samsung monitor, the Big Mac Daddy. It looks awesome. And it looks stupidly awesome in HDR. But if I fire up a game in GameScope, some of them limit, some of them are only limited to a portion of the screen, and that sucks. If I could run those, for example, a good example is the new Dead Space remake that came out. That one, if I run it normally on my desktop, it expands the full length. It looks awesome. If I run it in GameScope and I want HDR, it shrinks down to about that size. And I'm like, ugh. So there's some troubles there, but it's coming.
That's cool. So in Nobara, you're looking at maybe including some HDR stuff, and you've got a bunch of bleeding edge stuff. I was curious, how do you balance use cases like gaming versus other things?
I was going to actually bring up, go back to that when Kevin was talking about Mesa. That is awesome that you can swap back and forth between the Mesa versions, because one of the biggest things that I had a problem with early on when I was building Nobara was packaging Mesa. Because at first we packaged Mesa Git. We just shipped Mesa Git. And yeah, lesson learned real quick. Yeah, it's not fun when you're like, oh yeah, here, try our distro, and then they fire up the live USB and it doesn't want to load LLVM pipe, and you're like, So what we ended up doing is we shipped the latest stable released version of Mesa, but for most people are running AMD graphics cards, right? Intel graphics cards are a new thing these days as far as the dedicated cards. So what we did is we separated the AMD Vulkan drivers, or the Mesa Vulkan driver packages, from the rest of Mesa. So that way we can ship stable Mesa at the latest release on an ISO and still not have it crash on a live USB environment, but still, when people go to game, have the latest and greatest AMD RAD-V drivers for those specific packages. That way they get the latest changes. They might have a couple of bugs here and there, but it's not going to crash their system unless they hit some kind of new GPU hang or regression or something like that. And usually even then I try to make those packages at least once a week or once every 2 weeks, and get those out for people. Some people will remind me like, hey, get the new changes this week. But at the same time, sometimes there'll be like 2 or 3 weeks where nothing crazy has happened, and the last version that we had worked really well, and I'll be like, okay, well, we'll just leave it like this for now. There's no major changes that we need to backport, and or that we need to grab, and it all depends on situation, but we do try to keep at least the RADV drivers up to date on kind of like a rolling basis. And that's the other thing that I talked about was that I have we literally have a EULA on our website that says, hey, you understand this is a hobby distribution. It's not to be used in production, whereas not, obviously you guys don't have that luxury. You guys are a huge company, and you need, you have people that need that stability. I understand that. I get that. Like, I work on the Red Hat side. That's my day job, is to keep people's systems stable as well, and working, and figure out whatever they broke if it's not working. But I get it. You have to have a good mix of stability, and that's Mesa was a big part of that. Beyond that, we don't really have too many problems. Our kernel itself is mostly just stock Fedora. We've got a couple of patches in there for a little bit of gaming performance tweaks, and they don't really interfere too much with other stuff. It's pretty much similar to like Zen kernel, and there's I think I've told Heather about this. There's another guy on our team who is making another Ubuntu-based version, importing like a lot of the Nobara features over to Ubuntu, called Pika OS, and he's just straight up using Zen kernel. But the reason that we try to stay close to Fedora's upstream for our kernel, and just patch in what we need and make sure it doesn't break anything. So,
Cool.
Also, I will say one other cool thing is I just saw that the VRR refresh rate patches just got merged into Wayland. So Wayland and Mason on the GNOME side. So I'm really excited about that. I'm so glad that they finally got merged. It means I don't have to patch them in anymore.
So on the kind of idea of stability, how do you feel about like mods and modding? I know that, it's something that we would like to look at, but like most modding tools aren't tested for like Proton compatibility. Have you given thought to like how to cater to that?
Well, we already did one thing, which was switching from SE Linux to AppArmor. Early on, don't get me wrong, SE Linux is a fantastic security tool in a professional environment. But what I found was, honestly, AppArmor felt to me easier to write profiles for. And it's easy. Not only that, but it's also easier to kind of adjust things as you need, as you're going, as opposed to SE Linux. And that's just my personal preference. There are diehard SE Linux users that will argue that to the death, and that's fine. It's you pick your poison. But for me, moving to AppArmor made things a lot easier in terms of modding. Here's a perfect example. We had one where SE Linux was in permissive mode, and there was a Team Fortress 2 mod that somebody was using. It was just a GUI modification, and I couldn't figure out for the life of me why it was blocking. And I was like, SE Linux is in permissive. It shouldn't be blocking it, but it was. And as soon as he would disable SE Linux, it would work perfectly fine. And even after we tried to write a policy for it, it wasn't working properly. I'm like, okay, that's a bit odd. And eventually, we did, like I said, we moved over to AppArmor and got that situation sorted. So we still have good security on our system and stability, while at the same time allowing those mods to work.
Very cool. Very cool. Ken, Ollie, do you guys have thoughts on modding within the Steam Snap?
It's been interesting because it's sort of come up recently. So we were obviously our fundamental thing at the moment is focusing on the core gamer experience, right? This is a relatively new team in the desktop team that's sort of ramping up. So we wanted to go for the biggest bang for buck. And now we've sort of got to the point where I think our sort of roadmap with the Steam Snap is coming along nicely. And now it's about, okay, well, what are the other areas of specialization we want to look at? So there's sort of one bit that's about sort of things like Manga HUD, Goverlay, that sort of gaming environment tweaking setup. But then you want to go, okay, well, we also want to focus on things like multiplayer and anti-cheat. What can we do in from that perspective? But then, at the moment, we have a huge raft of fantastic single-player games. You've got things like Skyrim, right, that are working great on Linux. So how do we double down on the things that are already working really well and make sure that we support that full ecosystem, right? So it's not enough to just be able to play Skyrim if you're a Skyrim at the average Skyrim enjoyer, right? You need to be able to bring in all of the community curated and created content, right, to fulfill that experience. And I think when you start to think about games, you use Skyrim or Minecraft or things like that, you need to be able to support that wider ecosystem to be the genuine home for a title like that. It's not just enough that the base experience can play out of the box, right? Because so many of these games are community driven and community maintained from the modding scene, right? I play a lot of Europa Universalis Paradox games, right? And you can have huge reskins of things, make it a Star Trek equivalent or Star Wars or Lord of the Rings. And those are things that keep that game and those communities alive. And if you want those communities to genuinely, take Linux seriously as a platform for their hobby, then you have to keep sort of expanding your area of responsibility in terms of what you should be looking at and what you should be supporting. So, from my perspective, maybe Ken will have some other thoughts. It's very early days for us, but it's sort of something that we're conscious is a priority, I think.
Yeah, I haven't done any investigating myself yet, but the things that I'm concerned about are, somebody who's coming from a Windows environment, like maybe they've in the past dual booted, and now they want to try this experience on Linux. And they find some instructions how to load a mod for a game that they care about. These instructions are for Windows. How do we translate that sort of paradigm to the Linux experience, and how can they do this on their Ubuntu machine? Or for modders themselves, if the tools that they use to build their mods are done on Windows, is there things that we can do to enable that on Ubuntu? Because obviously on Linux, the developer experience is far superior, right? I would rather, make sure that we can provide the platform that those modders need to build their own mods on Linux. But like I said, I haven't done any research into this. I'm not a modder myself, but I would love to kind of tackle that and figure out where we're at and what we can do to improve that.
Yeah, I think for newcomers, a lot the biggest issue is figuring out all of the different directories, because when you have those mods going, like, there obviously you can't install stuff directly in Steam through through Skyrim or through the Skyrim mod store or whatever it's called. But then you have mods that you can download as well, and you have to go and manually install them, and then you have to figure out, okay, well, where's the folder for the game? We go figure that out. Or, oh, we just realized it's a snap or a flat pack. Now we have to go figure out where the game is within the snap or the flat pack, and then it gets even more confusing from there. So it can be daunting. It's rough, but it is a challenge for sure.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there's oodles of videos that a new developer could go find that kind of help describe this one corner of the Linux world. But maybe as we get there, supporting some more modding tools, we could do some more content posting that kind of like walks a new user through like the TLDR of all of the stuff they need to know to be able to set up for that kind of development. Yeah. Here's a good question in the channel by Kerrigan. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Hey there, Ubuntu folks. How's it going with the improvement of Vulkan and other gaming software? Ken, do you have any thoughts on Vulkan?
Not yet from our side. I mean, obviously, I mean, it's a big reason why a lot more games are playable now, right? That, like we said, the XVK, games being able to leverage Vulkan. We haven't started trying to tackle that yet, but yeah, we would like to get involved.
Vulkan is Vulkan, pretty much. Like, I know it sounds weird, but basically the way that it rolls is you've got kind of like 3 or 4 layers. Well, we'll say 3. You've got DXVK / VKD3D, which is the Wine Proton side. That's where a lot of your game specific fixes go. If they can't fix it there, then it rolls to Mesa. They'll file an upstream bug with Mesa, or they'll reach out to an NVIDIA contact if it's on the NVIDIA side and say, hey, here's this bug, need to get it fixed on the driver side. And then there's also the Vulkan side that the drivers rely on. So if there's maybe like a Vulkan extension or something that's needed, or a Vulkan feature that's needed, or something like that, then the driver people will say, hey, we need to get this implemented into Vulkan, or hey, we need to send a request to them for this. And so you got like kind of like 3 different layers of communication going on there, and there's different teams involved with each. I would say there's not too much directly. There are a lot of companies and devs involved with Vulkan, but most of the development work is on the first 2 parts, is either the driver, the XVK side, or the driver side.
The area where we may, be interested in getting involved in is if there is any deficit in Vulkan on Linux versus other platforms. Maybe that is something we could try to tackle a little bit on the Ubuntu side. Not sure yet, but just making sure that Vulkan is on par with other platforms. Vulkan on Linux is on par with other platforms.
Cool. Thanks for taking that, you guys. Here's another question that we hear every so often. I'd like to address it. Will there ever be a rolling release of Ubuntu? It'd be great.
Let me take this one. So I'm not going to say there will be, but I'm also going to say it's not necessarily never going to be a rolling release of Ubuntu. Is that a good teaser?
Let me elaborate on the teaser a bit, right? I don't. The LTS release for Ubuntu is never going to go anywhere, right? It's a critical part of many people's and many organizations' sort of infrastructure, and having these stable milestones is absolutely critical. But I think the work on the Steam Snap is really symptomatic of something that I think you could easily extrapolate from, right? If you were going to do this thought experiment, by having the latest Mesa drivers packaged up as a content snap in Steam, you're essentially getting rolling Mesa in that concept, right? It was 2 weeks ago, right? We were reading about a fix to Mesa that massively improved the frame rate performance of Doom 2016, right? One of my favorite games, right? And it was fantastic to see that fix was in the Steam Snap, 3 days later. And so within the concept of having these snaps which are isolated and separate from the rest of your system, we can roll and give much more sort of cutting edge updates there in a way that preserves the LTS nature of the OS itself. And so you could imagine that if you take the concept of modularizing via snaps, right, being able to pick and choose which elements of your distro you want to roll, and when they break, you can roll them back, right? And so I think it's the concept of a rolling release within the context of our Snap approach is probably going to blur the line over time, right? As elements of things like Mesa or are delivered to the user as snaps, then you start to think about, okay, well, what other bits of my distro do I have an LTS version of, but there's a snap channel here that could give me something that's more cutting edge, right? With much lower risk of knock on to the rest of my OS. So I think like conceptually, that's how we're thinking about it, right? When we were talking earlier about the concept of something like an NVIDIA driver Snap, right? That those are the sorts of things that we would love to explore and are actively interested in at the moment.
Just to
So
Can I tag on to that for a minute? Sorry. I was going to say, I think there's a big misconception with rolling release where people think that everything has to be the latest and greatest bleeding edge, and there are diehard Arch enthusiasts. And I myself, I ran Arch for like 5 years before I even had anything related to do with Red Hat. And once I moved from Arch to Fedora, I realized you don't have to have everything being rolling release. That's a quick way to get things broken. There are specific certain components that you would prefer to have rolling release, for example, such as Mesa or the latest kernel or latest NVIDIA drivers, or every once in a while, like maybe an FFmpeg update if you need that. But apart from a few key things, you don't really need everything to be rolling release. glibc would be another one that's actually been a nightmare within the last few years, with lots of anti-cheat changes and game breaking, and you guys probably know about that.
Mhm.
But
Well, the glibc is very interesting actually, because we went to SIGGRAPH at the end of last year, spoke to a lot of people in the VFX industry, and they are very protective about what version of glibc they're developing with, right? And so you've got to think about those, and when whether glibc can roll or whether it should not roll, right? And whether I should be able to freeze it and roll back or revert back is a really interesting challenge, depending on the use case, because you could have whole industries where their tool chain is completely locked to a much older version of glibc than maybe they want to have in any other aspect of their sort of desktop experience.
Yeah, it's it's been a pain, but like I said, I think that is we in the future. I agree with you that we're going to be blurring the lines a little bit in terms of what needs to be stable or what needs to be rolling release, and being able to choose and or roll back between specific components is a great thing, because it doesn't break the stability of the system, which is that's at the end of the day, you want to be able to just boot up your system and have it run. You don't want to think of, oh, I just ran an update yesterday. Oh, glibc and like Mesa both updated, and my desktop's not loading. And then you fix Mesa and you get into your desktop and you're like, okay, my desktop's loading now, but the anti-cheat for my game isn't working. So what else happened? You're stuck between a rock and a hard place with both of those.
Right. From like a technical limitation perspective in snaps, is there any limitation to what can be rolling? Like, are there any pieces of the OS that we can't do that with?
In the future, there really won't necessarily be pieces. You can pick and choose which chunks of your OS experience you want to be rolling.
Very exciting. There's a question that I've been very excited to ask, and I see that we're like running out of time. So, Eggy, can you talk a little bit, kind of going back to like the Proton GE side of things? Can you tell us how does the collaboration work with Valve? Like how do you, what does that contribution process look like?
So in a nutshell, like I said, I've been part of Discord with a lot of the Proton involved devs for a very long time, and I do run a fork, and I've run that fork for quite a while. Sometimes we'll have releases that are basically just, hey, pull in the upstream changes, add our stuff on top of it, and be done with it. And then sometimes we'll hit bugs here and there, and my community will report to me and be like, hey, there's this issue that was happening. It wasn't happening in the last version. And then I'll ask them, hey, does it happen in Proton Experimental? If it doesn't, then it's on our side. If it does, then it's something that they haven't hit yet or hasn't been reported yet. And I'll tell them, okay, let's go ahead and get this reported. We'll get a bug report open. And, a lot of people, because Proton GE includes wine staging, patches, as well as a couple of other game-specific patches, and the FSR patches, so that people can use AMD's FSR without having to go through GameScope. That's another really big thing that people like. But that's part of the reason that people turn to using Proton GE as opposed to like the normal Proton release or Proton experimental. And because it reaches that different, wider audience, or that audience that is trying to get more gains from a GE release, we get a lot of reports that maybe haven't hit the Proton radar yet. So the biggest thing is getting those bug reports and getting them fixed and relaying it to the devs and be like, hey, look, I got this guy hitting this issue or that issue. Or, I'll have them open up an actual issue on the GitHub bug tracker. That's the best way for official Proton experimental releases. Go on Valve. I know it may sound like a pain, and I know it might sound like I'm just reiterating what's obviously, what is the obvious step to do. But the biggest thing you can do is just, if you hit a bug and it happens in Proton experimental and GE, open a bug report on the Valve Proton bug tracker. If it doesn't, if it only happens in GE, then let me know. Hop in my Discord. I'm one person. I do not keep the bug tracker open on my GitHub because, like I said, I will get bombarded. That's why I don't do it. I would rather talk in person with the person that's having the issue over Discord and see if I can get it fixed. And then if I can't, I'll make a bug report myself or get in contact. Because like I said, I also am part of the wine staging team. I play a very minor role there. I mainly just do bug reports if we hit something. Those guys are fantastic. They've been super, super supportive over many, many years. And, usually if I find a bug with like an upstream patch or something, they'd be like, okay, let's see if we can figure it out. But again, bug reports play a big role in Proton and Proton GE and Wine in general. Getting those bug reports recognized and getting them fixed after they're reported. The other thing is some patches we can immediately upstream or fix, and some we can't. And I've had several patches in the past that they've either been minor patches for Wine, and I'll be like, hey, Wine staging guys, is this something staging can use? Or, hey, maybe we'll open a Wine bug report and get it fixed in Wine, and then it'll get backported to Proton. Or, hey, maybe we can get it in Proton first, see how it works, and then get it in Wine after that. And there's also been compatibility changes. Like, for example, I know maybe like 2 or 3 years ago, there was a Bison compatibility issue, which is really minor. It was a build issue. But, I already had the change in Proton GE, and I was like, hey, here, let me just go ahead and open a PR, and you guys can get it merged. And boom, it was fixed like that. So there are a lot of things that go on in the background in terms of getting those fixes upstream. But at the same time, people might wonder, hey, why aren't all of the changes in Proton GE upstreamed? And again, not everything can be upstreamed. I'm running my own private hobby fork, whereas Valve as a company, if I go in and do like, for example, the Media Foundation, if I do any kind of Media Foundation changes or patches, they can't include my version of FFmpeg that's packaged with Proton. They can only include the version that comes with Steam, and that may not have the same codec changes or codecs required. That's the whole point of them having their own media converter built in. But with Proton GE, I'm able to do that with the FFmpeg side and have the media converter for whatever I missed. I know This is like a big basket of answers that you guys just open, but that's kind of the gist of it. Like, if I can get it upstreamed, I do. If I can open a bug report, I do. But there are some things in GE that you just can't.
That makes sense. And I guess that leads into like another question. I guess would you say that's the biggest bang for the buck? If a community person wanted to get involved, just like go file some bugs, run the different, versions and file bugs.
That's an immediate yes. Bug reports are the biggest thing. If you want something fixed, open a bug report. If you don't
Okay.
have a bug report, nobody's ever going to see it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And if someone wanted to run like the experimental version of Proton on their Steam Deck or Proton GE, like, are there instructions out there for them to find?
Yep. The easiest way.
Very
Well,
cool.
Proton Experimental. That's shipped by Valve. It comes in there automatically, and you can even change whatever branch version. Like if you choose to run the game with Proton Experimental, and you go in your games library list, and then you right click on Proton Experimental and go into the options, you can actually choose: do you want to run the latest release of Proton Experimental, or do you want to run the bleeding edge changes that happened like yesterday? So.
Yeah.
As far as Proton Experimental goes, that's how you do that. With Proton GE, the easiest way, I will say, on the Steam Deck is drop into desktop mode and install the Proton Up -QT Flatpak. I don't run the Proton Up QT Flatpak, but I am aware of the developer and I've used it for many years, and that's literally the easiest way to just get Proton GE installed on the Steam Deck. I will say in general, even if you're not on the Steam Deck, just get that Flatpak installed and then fire it up, and it'll allow you to install Proton and or WineGE, because I have, for people who use Lutris or don't use Steam, I have WineGE as well. And that's basically, it takes it's the same thing. Okay, it's not the same thing as Proton GE. And that's because there's components like DXVK and VKD3D that are shipped separately. But what WineGE is it takes the Proton Experimental wine base and it tacks on our patches and wine staging to it, so that you basically get the whole wine specific portion, and then you can use that in Lutris alongside with whatever Lutris ships for their version of DXVK or VKD3D.
That makes sense. And then also similarly for the Steam Snap, the best way to help out is to go try it and file bugs. Let us know when you have issues. As Ollie mentioned, it's a pretty new gaming team, and they're all rock stars. But we're new, so we could use the feedback.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think like one of the most interesting things that any gamers out there who are gaming on Linux or Ubuntu specifically, I think one of the things that I found, running more and more games on Ubuntu and trying to make that my sort of primary sort of gaming environment was just the amount of sort of assumed knowledge, right? Oh yeah, this works fine on Linux or Ubuntu. You just have to remember to like sort out these commands or put this over here, right? And I think those things, because we're an ecosystem of tinkerers, right? These things become white noise to us, right? We don't notice that actually maybe there's a way we can re-architect things so we don't have to run 4 different commands and download this and enable that, right? And I think actually I'd be really interested in people, particularly in the concept of things like modding, really documenting what is different from their Windows experience when dealing with mods, right? And if they were able to share with us sort of the different workflows that they have, I'm really interested in us going through that and going, oh, well, we can fix that, and we can do that, right? And I think we should set quite a high bar for how intuitive gaming should be on Linux, right? We shouldn't be okay with compromise in some of those things, right? We should be making sure that whenever we spot a workaround, we highlight that I have to do this workaround to get this working. Whether that's on your own blog and you send that to us, or whether you actually post it in the discourse or something like that. But it's really interesting for us in terms of identifying those issues that a lot of people think are quite small, sort of minor usability things, that for most gamers who are maybe looking at Linux for the first time, it's not as intuitive, right? And I think those sort of easy fixes are also very important, making sure that there's no initial friction to just getting up and running in the first place.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's a very good point. Well, folks watching, if you have any final questions for anybody here, just let us know. I think this is a a great way to kind of show that there are real humans behind these projects. And it's pretty impressive, Eggy, that it's just one person behind like Proton G. I wanted to ask, like, is it just you behind Nobara as well, or do you have any other cohorts?
There's me and about like 2 or 3 other people, but mainly just me. I will say so. Our kernel, we've got someone who is also a dev for the ASUS CTL or ASUS D for the ASUS patches that they try to get upstreamed. We have somebody that helps out with our kernel there. We also there's another person named Sentry who they run their own kernel. It's their kernel fork for Fedoras, and originally ours was based off of theirs. But then after we gutted the SE Linux bits and replaced them with AppArmor, then that's when we started moving on to, okay, well, I guess I'm going to maintain that again. But he still helps out every once in a while because we still use the same patches. That's all as far as the kernel goes. We do have the other guy, Cosmo, who, again, I said is the guy running Pika OS. He is really good with GUI stuff. In general, this is crazy. He's a 14-year-old kid. A teenager, not a kid. But the dude is brilliant. He's really, really bright. He is excellent with GUI management and packaging. With Fedora stuff, I've here and there I've had stuff that I've had to overview or say, hey, maybe you might want to change this, or you need to do this, or don't do it this way, do it this way instead. But overall, he gets a lot of the picture, and he's been a really, really big help. He helped us with our NVIDIA installer, getting the GUI set up for that, with our welcome app, with porting over some of the things from other distros. For example, we've got the Linux Mint web app converter. We've also got the layout changes that they have in was it Zorin OS, where you can change the different GNOME layouts, whatever it uses. So he's been pretty awesome in terms of getting some of that stuff ported over. So yeah, we do have it's not just me doing all of it, but I'm thankful for the few people that we do have.
Yeah, that's cool. And I mean, this is what the next generation is going to be using, right? When they're in 10 years, they're going to go, oh, Linux versus Windows, like, who cares? It's games, right? Games just work. And that's pretty rad. So we'll be sure to provide links to all of these different places. I'll write up a blog post afterwards so that people can read about some of the highlights, since I know it was a little bit off time for everybody. But thanks a lot, Eggy, Ken, and Ollie, for being here, for your time. Thanks, everybody that came to watch and ask questions. Do you have any final words, asks of the community? Anything to plug, Eggy?
I am great. I just wanted to say thanks for having me. It's been a blast. This is kind of the first time that I've actually done kind of like a podcast or web-based show. I've been invited by a couple other people before, and time doesn't work out most of the time, and it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, thanks for making time for us this weekend. So
Great job,
everybody, have a great weekend. All right, well, we'll say goodbye, everybody, and we'll see you kind of at the end of the month for the next edition of the Ubuntu Desktop Team.
Take care.
All right, bye.
Bye.